All right, we have made it to day 4 of the Bible reading program, and we're so glad that we've made it to the end of the first week of the Bible reading plan. So I want to congratulate you on being a part of this journey, whether you are on schedule or whether you are catching up because maybe you got a late start. Congratulations to you, because at least you're committed and you're in the faith, in the journey with us to read the entire Bible in 1 year. If you have not joined, it's not too late. You can click the link in the description box below that will take you directly to the YouVersion Bible app, and you can accept the invitation to join this community of believers who are reading the Bible all over the world to gain a better understanding of what God has to say to us in this time that we're living in. So if you have not joined already, please take a moment to click the link, join us in this journey, and I believe you will be blessed by it. So today we read Job chapter 1 through chapter 5. And if you may be confused, I want to explain to you why we are now in the book of Job. Just 3 days ago, we were reading in the book of Genesis, and we read from Genesis 1 to Genesis 11. But today we're starting in the book of Job, and this is because we are not reading a canonical or canonized Bible reading plan from Genesis to Revelation. Rather, what we're doing is we're reading a chronological Bible plan. And what the chronological Bible plan does is it takes us in the order of the events as they actually happened. So what we discover in history and studies of contextual and cultural explanations, we learn that Job actually lived around the time of Abraham. In fact, some people believe that they were in some way, form, or fashion contemporaries, even though they may not have lived in the same area. They were indeed living at or around the same time. So what we're doing here is we're seeing a bit of a change in stories, obviously, a focus. But just think of it this way. Think of it as a stage play where you have one act, and this act may be concerning a particular family. And then as you are going through the story, the scene cuts and moves to a second act, which is concerned with another group of people. And the reason the story is able to maintain continuity and the reason it is able to all make sense is because the individuals, the characters who are being portrayed in the movie or the play are actually living in the same time. They're facing the same scenarios, the same difficulties, the same challenges. And the unique thing that makes the story compelling is that what one individual may give as a response to the same circumstance, another individual may give a completely different response. Or at times there may be two significantly different circumstances for two different groups of people happening in the same time, which gives even more drama to the story. So what we want to see here is we're looking at 3 or 4 different characters who are living at the same time, but they're processing their experience in the world a bit differently because of what has happened in the Garden of Eden. And so we're going to look through that. We've discovered Adam and Eve. We talked about Noah. We're now going to look into the life of an individual named Job. And so this is going to be very interesting, and we're going to read this book all the way through, and then we'll return back to Genesis chapter 12 in a few more days. Now, let's talk about a few principles. Job is a character who is a bit mysterious. There has been a lot of debate on whether he was an actual person who lived or whether the book of Job is intended to be a sort of a parabolic, wisdom focused book. There are opinions on different sides of the table. Some people believe Job actually did live in real time. He was an actual human being that suffered these things. Others believe that Job was a parable that portrays a certain truth that believers should understand about how they live in the world. Either way, it is a significant study. And it tells us a lot, firstly, about God. And I think this is where we need to really, really focus our attention, because in this time that we are living or reading about, many individuals live closely to the time where God actually was heard walking in the Garden of Eden. That is to say, we in the 21st century, we're so far removed from the creation story that we can hardly fathom the way in which God is intricately involved in every detail. Even though he's not micromanaging, he is in fact involved in every detail of human existence and creation's existence. But if you think about Job, Job is just a few generations away from the moment where God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. In fact, creation, as we can understand it from the biblical narrative, is fairly young as it refers to or as it reflects what God was doing in Genesis chapter 1 and in Genesis chapter 2. And essentially what happened in Genesis chapter 3 with Adam falling in that garden. So you can imagine as Job is sitting here and he's wrestling with this concept of God, what is God like? But more so, what is God like to people like me who are subject to a world of sin and death? What does he do? How does he respond? Where is he operating? How does he react to the concerns and the elements of daily living for a person who is, as the text says, upright and blameless, right? So as we think about this passage, what we're getting into is a concept and an understanding of God. And here's something interesting about this text. Everything that we will read about Job and the experiences that he endured, he never once says anything about the antagonist, who is Satan, being in control of the things that are happening in his life. In other words, he doesn't blame the devil. He doesn't blame Satan. He goes directly to the person that he feels is responsible and has the ultimate power, and he calls him into question because ultimately this is his creation, and he is the one that can determine whether something happens or does not happen, and he wants to know, why is this happening to him in his life? So we have Job. Now, here's the thing. The believer's life this is what Job at least begins to understand. He begins to understand that the believer's life is not exempt from struggles, but it is preserved through deliverance. And this is the thing that he is going to wrestle with in this text. Whereas he, and also perhaps Satan, who is the antagonist in this passage, was saying that God protects and keeps those who believe in him, those who follow him, those who live for him, away from struggle. What everyone is going to discover is that God, in fact, does not keep his people from struggle. Rather, what he does is he preserves them through the struggle, and he provides opportunities for deliverance. And perhaps this is the most important principle that we can learn from today's reading, is that as believers, we don't have the privilege of being exempt from problems and difficulties and struggles. But what we have that non-believers have is the promise that in the struggle, God will deliver us from them all. And that is probably one of the most consoling biblical theories and ideas that we can pull from at least what we read in this day's reading about how to live in a world that is dominated by sin and death. Now, a second thing that we pull from this text is the response that one is to give to struggle when they endure it. That is, how does a believer respond to problems whenever they endure those problems? And I just absolutely love what we find in Job chapter 1, verse 20 through verse 22, because when all these things are happening to Job, this is his response. His response is found in this text. It says, Job stood up and tore his robe in grief, and then he shaved his head and fell to the ground to worship. He said, I came naked from my mother's womb, and I will be naked when I leave. The Lord gave me what I had, and the Lord has taken it away. Praise the name of the Lord. And in all of this, Job did not sin by blaming God. Brothers and sisters, here's a principle for life. The principle is simply this: when a believer is encountering struggle and difficulty, the response to the struggle is never complaining. It is never getting all frustrated. The correct response to struggle is worship. Worship is the correct response to a struggle. In fact, let me put it this way. Worship is the believer's response to a struggle. Job proved in this moment what God said about him in the earlier verses of chapter 1, that he was blameless, he was a man of complete integrity, and he feared God and he stayed away from evil. And when those times in his life came where he had to deal with things that were uncomfortable, he proved what God said about him by how he responded to those struggles. But then there's a third principle. And the third principle is simply this: complaining is the worst response to struggle, but unwise questioning is the foolish response to struggles. We're going to see in a moment that, yes, Job complains. In fact, we've read a little bit of that in chapter 3, where he's complaining, he's going back and forth, he's a little uneasy about what's happening, but he didn't complain as much as perhaps we think he should have complained, considering what he was enduring. But what we find here is perhaps the most foolish thing to do when we are facing a struggle is to, in our lack of wisdom, question God as if we have all the answers. You see, there are two different ways to go about this. There's a way of saying, questioning God and saying, Lord, I want to understand what your purpose is here. I want to understand what it is you're doing. I want to understand your will. But there's another way of questioning God, which is foolish. It is questioning God as if you have all the answers, as if God owes us an explanation. And this is perhaps where Job gets into a bit of trouble, whereas he could have said, Lord, I see what you're doing, but I don't understand it. Lord, I see what you're doing. I want to understand what is the purpose. Rather than doing that, he states, Lord, I see what you're doing. I don't like it, and it's not fair. You shouldn't do this to me. Tell me what is going on. And this is where Job gets into a bit of trouble. So the remainder of the book of Job is going to be a dialogue between himself and his friends about, why is this fair? How could you allow this to happen to a person that is so committed to living for you? And it is going to be a time of us learning a whole lot about what we should and shouldn't do in the middle of a struggle. So friends, we got a lot to read, and we're going to enjoy every bit of it. But I want to encourage you to keep on reading. Drop in the comment box below what you took or what you're taking from the daily readings. I'd love to hear your response. But thank you so much for being a part of the community. Let's continue to read. Until next time, God bless and live by the word.